All right. So I'm a little newer to the city. You've been covering Detroit for a long time.
Yeah.
This is actually my first municipal election covering Detroit.
Yeah.
I've covered a lot of elections across the state, but
Yeah.
not a city race in Detroit.
This will be different, I promise.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering about that. Like for you, what is really different about this now that we're kind of coming out of the Duggan era? You know, we've talked a little bit about some of the candidates themselves, but
Yeah.
but for you, I mean, top level view, what's different about this?
I mean, so I've been saying to everybody who asks, and lots of people are asking, not just here in Detroit, but I get calls at least once or twice a week from people in other cities who are curious about what's going to happen. I've been saying that it's too early for me to have too many opinions about it, but there are some things that do really jump out. One is that we have so many people who are interested, who I think of as qualified, as people who, at least on paper, bring the kind of experience and intellect and interest to the job that we would want in the next mayor. We don't always get that here in Detroit, and it's been a long time since we had this many people thinking about things in that way and raising their hands and saying, I want to do this. And I feel like each of the candidates, when you watch them talk about it, there is a level of sincerity about not just wanting the job, but wanting to do the job, wanting to have the impact that the mayor could have on Detroiters' lives. So that's one huge thing. The other thing that's always on my mind is what's next for the city. These things that have happened recently that remind us of how vulnerable people are in the city and how many people are vulnerable in the city. It just breaks your heart. I had a conversation with my mother who lived here for more than 40 years of her life. She saw the thing about the children freezing to death in the casino garage on the news where she lives, and wanted to ask me about it. And the pain that I heard in her voice about why is this still happening in Detroit? That's what she kept asking me. It's just that, everyone talks about how much better things are all the time. And when she comes to visit, that's when I go show her is all the things that are different. She said that shouldn't still be happening, and I think a lot of us feel and this isn't about statistics, right? Statistically, the city is doing better with almost all of those things: poverty, crime, opportunity is up. There are all kinds of ways to get ahead in Detroit now that didn't exist 20 or 25 years ago. But you still have this population of Detroiters that just is not participating in that. And we've got to figure out why. We've got to figure out why all the things that we're doing aren't reaching them on an emergency basis or on a long-term basis, and what it is that we have to do to get them, more help, to get them to the place where the things that are getting better here are getting better for them. And then the third thing I think about is the momentum. I grew up in Detroit in the 70s and 80s, which I remember fondly, but in the city's history, those are not the shining best decades. I mean, things were pretty rough in the 70s. Things were even rougher in the 80s and 90s. I've known lots of people who worked for lots of different mayors in the city. People who used to work for Coleman Young used to talk about cabinet meetings where they would literally have to sit and figure out how to make the next payroll, right, in the city. That money was so tight in those days that they just couldn't do anything that they wanted to do. It was just keeping the lights on, literally, and we failed at that, right, later, and had to reboot the whole system. We're in such a different place now. I mean, it's not the city that almost any of us can remember from those days. And sometimes I get worried that it's not real still, right? I'm enough of a pessimist. It's just like with the Lions, right? I mean, when they start to do well and they get into the playoffs, I'm always like, is this real? I've been around long enough to know not to get too excited about it. I still feel that way about the city. And maybe that's not accurate. Maybe we're past the point where things could slip back to where they used to be. But for me, it's always that worry that somehow we're a snake bitten, and that we can't get past a certain point to be a healthy city in the ways that I know other cities are. I've lived in lots of other cities, and I've always been, whether they were better cities than Detroit or cities that had more problems than Detroit. I've lived in both. Uh, uh, the idea of the things that people have in other cities and take for granted that we have never had, at least not in my life.
Like a functional bus
A
system.
functional bus system, right? I mean, basic things. That's bothersome, and so I'm worried. I worry about a leadership change affecting that momentum in a way that doesn't benefit us. And there are complicated questions about that. How you manage the enthusiasm of business against the needs of people who don't have opportunity. But what we can't have is a halt or a slowing of that momentum and that investment and that interest. So those are the things that I'm thinking of as we kind of go into the meat of the year with the filing deadline and the campaigns and stuff. That's what I'm looking for out of all the candidates. We get pretty decent turnout these days for national elections. For state elections, they're not awful. For local elections, that number's been going down for quite some time, and it suggests its own dissatisfaction is what it tells me, that Detroiters don't feel like they have good enough choices to motivate them to come out and vote for the government that is closest to them, the government that has the most chance to affect their lives. They're sitting it out. There are a lot of eyes, I think, this year that will be focused on how we get more people to participate.